Hi, it's boiling egg temperature outside, and that is why I am sweating, and I'm also excited about the bicycle that I've built and got to ride it for this past weekend. And in this video, if you are a competitive cyclist whose bicycle and its maintenance is paid for by sponsors, or if you have a huge budget, then you might find this video only entertaining and educational. But if you are a mere mortal, like I am, you might also find it helpful. In this video, I will discuss various different types of bicycles and bicycle patents and discuss their pros and cons in order to help you make an informed decision when you are buying a bicycle or deciding to replace something, or as I often get questions about upgrades and so on. So that's what we will discuss here today. Because I'm the most absent-minded person that I know, I wrote a table of contents that will be visible in the video's timeline and in the description. And these are the talking points that I will walk through, and apologies for my 3-year-old handwriting. This is as good as it gets. To use an example, I picked every single component on this bicycle, built everything, wheels and everything, as I thought would be good for particular reasons. And obviously this is my choice, but my preference may not be your preference. So I will discuss all the pros and cons and keep it, informative and objective. So let us begin. The first thing that I wish to discuss are tubeless tires. Most bicycle tires had tubes inside of them. I will show what a tube looks like for those who don't know. This is an example of a big 29er or mountain bicycle tube. This one is punctured, and when you remove the tire, this goes inside and keeps the air, and the tire is outside to just keep traction and to hold this from bursting when you inflate it to a high pressure. Relatively recently, over the past decade, tubeless tires have become more and more popular for bicycles. They have their pros and their cons. The pros of tubeless tires, their primary, upside is that they don't use tubes. It's just a beefier, thicker tire that, in that case, holds the air pressure inside and uses its tread for traction. So it serves two purposes. It doesn't have a separate tube, and the biggest advantage is that you can run them at a low pressure. If you run tube tires at a low pressure, then when you hit a bump, the tube will press against the rim and it will compress and pinch the tube and cut it in two pieces. It looks like a snake bite. That's what it's called, that kind of puncture, the snake bite puncture. So you would get like two holes on the tube, and it's usually on the lower side where it's pressed against the rim when you hit something with your tire at a low pressure. So tubeless tires do allow you to run them at a lower pressure without getting pinch flats. There is a limit, because if you hit something too hard and your pressure in the tires is very low, then you might deform the rim. Low pressure tires will not protect the rim as well as high pressure tires. So when you dent the rim with a tubeless tire, it usually can no longer hold pressure, because tubeless tire needs to be kept against the rim's walls with air pressure, and when the rim wall gets deformed, it will force you to put a tube inside to get home and then replace, or if you can fix the rim, bend it back into place, you might do it. But with most aluminum and carbon fiber frames, it's not very simple or very effective. So that would be a limit. And why would you want to run low pressure tires? It's usually for off-road riding. Lower pressure lets you get better traction. Basically, comfort is less of an issue. In that case, it mostly boils down to pressure. So if you're riding in some mud, loose gravel and sand or snow, it can help. And that is the main pro. Some other pros are arguably a bit lower weight because you don't have the tube. Yes, the sidewalls are a bit thicker and beefier, but still it's not heavier than the normal tire with the tube combined, so you get a bit less weight, and that's basically about it. I have a special separate article that discusses this at great length, and I will put it in the video's description, but I will briefly touch upon the biggest downside of tubeless tires, and that is that you need to put some goo, like a very dense milk, inside in order to keep the pressure, because they are not firm enough as they are on automobiles and motorcycles to keep the air inside all by themselves, the tires. So you need that. You need to replace it every 6 months, at the most up to 1 year. You need to be careful about parking your bicycle with the valve down. Some of that may get into the valve and make it seize. When you are mounting a tire, if you've had any kind of mishap, you need to get air quickly inside the tire. When you're running tubeless, you cannot just use a small hand frame pump. You need to get some CO2 cartridges or a full-size compressor and make it pop up and stick against the walls, and then you can inflate it further normally, but that starting section is a problematic. If you run at low pressures, there's more probability of tires slipping off the rim when you're cornering hard and similar. When that happens, everyone around you and you get sprayed with that goo, and you need to mount the tire back, make sure it's seated, and you need to make sure that your rim tape is just right. It shouldn't be too wide, too narrow. I have an article about rim tape, including tubeless tires rim tape. So it does create a lot of other problems. In practice, it's very easy to replace and fix a puncture on a tire that has a tube, and it's not something that I enjoy doing when it is a tubeless tire, especially if I'm somewhere on the road. Yes, tubeless tires, thanks to that goo, will self-seal for any minor punctures. That is another advantage, but there are tubed tires that have puncture protection that works very well. They are a bit heavier, a bit less subtle, how do I say it in English, so it has a downside, but if I had to put it shortly, tube tires are simpler, despite having an extra element, the tube. Tubeless tires are a bit more of a hassle, and they are a bit of extra fun just for the tires themselves, and many people like that, and that's perfectly fine, but it has its downsides. For a road bicycle, for anything except mountain biking with very wide tires, the pros are how do I say, less pronounced. You are more likely to experience the downside. So I would not advise them for road or even for some city commuting type of bicycles, but for mountain bikes they make a bit more sense. However, the choice is up to you, of course. That's about the tubeless tires. When I talk about tubeless tires, I must also mention the hookless rims. Hookless rims were a thing about 50 or 60 years ago. Then, if not sooner, the rims with hooks were invented, and that was awesome because it helped keep the tires in place, so you could run different widths and higher pressures without worrying about tires flying off the rim. However, in this decade, it's cheaper and easier to make hookless rims out of carbon fiber, especially. They don't have to manufacture those hooks and bend it, and so that's now being advertised as better, but it's mostly nonsense. I think it boils down to cheaper manufacturing, and the only tires that you can dare to put on such rims are tubeless tires, because they have thicker, more sturdy, more rigid sidewalls. If you put a normal non-tubeless or tubeless ready tire on a hookless rim, you can have problems. So I'm not a fan of hookless rims. I would not recommend them. Their pros are highly questionable, in my opinion, based on my experience at least. And I do have an article discussing the pros and cons of hookless rims in detail, and I will put it in the video's description if I don't forget when I upload this. I might make it even pop up in your top right hand corner. So that's about the wheels. Now let's talk about the Thru-axles. What I mean about Thru-axles is let me show you. This is what I'm talking about. So this goes through a hole in the hub, and it is screwed into the frame that has matching threads for this, and that is how the hub is held in place. It compresses the two sides of your frame against the hub's walls and keeps the hub tight. In and of itself, it's not supposed to carry any load. This is the older quick release system. I have a video explaining the beauty and ingenuity of this, and it makes it very quick, very easy to mount and remove wheels, and you can get this anywhere, at least in my country. While there are several different diameters and different thread pitches of these threads. So if you manage to break or damage it, it can happen. You will have more problems sourcing this, and especially in my country, in Serbia, and it's a bit longer procedure to mount and remove wheels. They can drop from your hands, sorry. And if you damage the threads on the frame where this is screwed in, then you have a major problem that's not as easy as simple or cheap to fix. If this does not thread into the frame, so you haven't got those problems. The main, and I would say only advantage of this, is that with disc brakes, that I'll discuss a bit later, this holds your front wheel securely in place, because it goes through the fork. With quick release, forks usually have dropouts cut in their bottom section. Let me show you. They usually have an opening in the bottom section, and because the geniuses from the cycling industry decided to just copy paste what motorcycles do with the disc caliper on the back side of the fork, then the braking torque tends to pull the wheel out of the dropouts, and you need to regularly check and retighten these if they start loosening themselves, and that only happens with disc brakes. Otherwise it's a perfectly safe system when you have rim brakes. So that is a combination of factors that works against you in that case. So this is probably the better option if you decide to go with disc brakes. And for all other cases, I would say that it's not as practical as this, and this is what I would recommend. Now let's go to cartridge bearing hubs. For hubs, some manufacturers make hubs with cartridge bearings that you can ride until the bearings are toast, and then use special tools to pull them out and install new ones. There are ways to hack those and to use improvised tools, but that greatly increases the probability of damaging your hub. So it's your call, your decision. I don't like to improvise with other people's hubs when doing that, though I have successfully managed to do that with improvised tools. It's definitely not my preferred way. The upside of old style cup and cone hubs that Shimano is still manufacturing is that you need just a cone wrench and a normal wrench or two cone wrenches to disassemble it, clean it, lubricate it, and put it back together, and it uses ordinary bearing bolts, so you don't have to find and source the proper size, the cartridge bearings and so on. So those are pros and cons, and the decision on what is better for you to use is, again, it's your call. I cannot give a clear recommendation on that. I really cannot. The beauty, I have all the tools, so for me it's cheap and simple to do with the cartridge bearings, and I don't have to service them regularly. The cup and cone hubs need to be serviced regularly. If you don't service them regularly, then you have the part of the hub that is hub itself damaged, and you can also replace that, but it's more complicated, requiring even more special tools and more difficult to source. So I would say practically the hub is toast then. So the cup and cone are simple to do maintenance on, but really need to get regular maintenance every 12 months or 5,000 kilometers or about 3,000 miles, whichever comes first. So pros and cons to everything. The cartridge bearing hubs are usually also more expensive, also take that into account. And the rear cartridge bearing hubs have some design flaws that I've discussed in the previous videos. If I don't forget, I'll put that video also in the video's description. So I don't think I forgot to mention anything. Suspension. Suspension has its pros because it does make your ride more comfortable. That's the most obvious thing, but another, perhaps even more important or just as important factor is that suspension helps your traction. It improves your traction, especially when you have some uneven terrain or some problems. So it has some undisputed pros, advantages, no doubt about that. But it comes at a cost in terms of weight and in terms of complexity and expense. So cheap, low quality suspension forks or even full suspension bicycle frames are worse than no suspension, to put it bluntly. Decent quality and high-end stuff is good, but it is very expensive and it's not cheap to do maintenance on. It often requires special tools, and you might not be comfortable doing that at home, so you would need to take the bicycle regularly for an overhaul to a bicycle shop, wait for it to be fixed and so on. So keep that in mind if you opt to go with a suspension bike. Disc brakes. Now let us move on. Disc brakes, they also have their pros and cons. As I already touched upon, they will not let you get away with quick release systems. That's one of the downsides. You can ride them. I rode, but this is safer if you're going with these brakes. They give you, the main advantages is better modulation in mud and very wet condition. Stopping power, that's a common misconception. They are not superior to rim brakes. To do good quality disc brakes are not superior in stopping power to good quality rim brakes, because the limiting factor most often is the traction that you have on your tires. So the rest is irrelevant. However, their biggest advantage is the modulation, that you can easily adjust the braking force just right how you need it for the given conditions when it is very muddy and wet. Rim brakes are also good at modulation, but not when it's very muddy and wet, so they have their limits and you must adjust your riding style accordingly. In very deep freezing temperatures, I would also say that these brakes have their advantages, and I'm talking about minus 10 degrees Celsius and lower with a lot of snow and ice. For anything above that, near the freezing temperature, rim brakes have served me well, both on the flats and when riding up hills. And so, to cover this whole first section, I rode bicycles for decades before the disc brakes and suspension and all these other gadgets were available, and I climbed everywhere, got down every track, every hill, both on-road and off-road. And if it were not for that, I would most probably have believed what many marketers and influencers and even cyclists are saying, that you must not dare to ride off-road without disc brakes and suspension and so on and so forth. This bicycle that we'll show in more detail during this video, this can get anywhere, up any hill, down any hill, and in all conditions you just need to adjust your riding style. But you need to do that with every bicycle. Even the best hydraulic brakes are not all powerful. They have their limits as well. So it's just about the level of performance. Now let us move on to integrated STI levers that combine shifters and the braking and index shifting. Index shifting is very practical, very quick, and it requires, I have a series of articles about drivetrain compatibility. So how much your shifter pulls per each click must be perfectly matched with how much your rear derailleur moves laterally for each millimeter of cable moved or released, and that must be matched with the pitch of your cassette, or how far the cassette chainings are spaced. That is the biggest downside of index shifting, while the combined shifter and brake levers that we see on road bicycles have an extra disadvantage, and that is that they are no longer being made to be serviceable. They're not very robust, and they are expensive, and they can leave you on the road broken I've had it happen, I've seen it happen, and it's not very reliable. At least that's my opinion based on my experience, nothing more than that. So with mountain bikes, you have the separate shifters and levers. They give up on trying to build it all into once, thank God. And on those it's a bit better, but again, you have the downsides of trying to match everything. And when you cannot source every component, or you wish to do some hack or combination, it gets a bit trickier. As I said, I had to write down everything, and I have a series of articles on my website dealing with just what combines with what for index shifting. The beauty of friction shifters, and here we have some friction shifters, is that they are just held on by friction. There are no separate distinct clicks, and when I pull or release the cable, the rear or front derailleur moves, and I just move it until the shift is made. So I can do the same for the front. So that is the downside, that it takes some time. You need to concentrate a bit. You easily get the hang of it or habit, but yes, especially for people who never use this, you need to concentrate, and when the shift is made, you need to sometimes fine-tune it to avoid any rattling if that annoys you, and it does. So that's an extra second, and yes, it is a fact, it is a downside, but everything else is a pro, and you can get away with crazy combinations of front and rear derailleurs, because these let you shift smoothly and control it, not just have one click and have the shifter, the front or rear derailleur move almost instantly to that position. So it also lets you shift very quickly, because here, that's something I hear people say it's slow shifting. No, it's not. Here, I think this is, find me a STI set that can shift this quickly. So no, they're not slow. They have their downsides about tuning, but they are not slow, at least in my experience. Now, carbon fiber frames and parts. Carbon fiber is a material that's super popular now. It is considered to be the pinnacle of the cycling industry parts, and very popular. It has the advantage of being lighter. That's the main advantage. Everything else is a disadvantage. It's a lot more expensive compared to steel and aluminum, especially, maybe not to titanium. It's relatively sensitive to things that happen when you're riding or maintaining your bicycle. So if you over tighten a bolt, pinch bolt of your carbon fiber frame or seat post, you can crack them. So you need to use a torque wrench and be very careful. If you grease them or drop some oil or similar, they will start sliding. You cannot torque them too strongly, so you need to find a way to degrease it all and then put it together. Then if some parts on bicycle need to be made of some metal, aluminum or steel, some attachments for bottles and everything, and then when you're using carbon fiber combined with that, you usually experience a lot of galvanic corrosion, and it's not very easy to prevent that using anti-seize, as it is when you have metal frames and metal parts. So they have their downsides. An alleged downside is that they also dampen road buzz. That's something that I hear a lot from road bicycles riders. A bit wider tire will do a lot more to making your ride more comfortable compared to switching your forks from aluminum or steel to carbon. The same goes for your frame. The same goes for any part on your bicycle. There are other ways to get comfort, and I would also argue that steel is also not too bad at absorbing stuff, though unlike carbon, it is a bit more flexible frame. If you wanted to do that made of steel, carbon is better in those terms. I'm not going to deny that, but the differences and the returns are very diminishing, and you get a lot better results by just going with a bit wider tires. I must say that on road bicycles, I rode 28mm tires before it was cool, so 15 or more years ago. And where was I now? The same goes for all the other parts of carbon fiber. The cost and risk compared to advantages is highly questionable, and do consider that. So you need to be very careful to inspect them regularly. The only way to inspect them for any delamination and cracks that are not visible on the outside is to take them to ultrasonic scans. That costs money and takes time. So with metals, it usually happens with bicycle parts that you see cracks on the outside, either aluminum or steel especially. So those are things to consider when you are considering and thinking that it's a great idea to get a carbon fiber bicycle. Now, internally routed cables. I will be very subjective here and say that there should be a special place, a special circle in hell for people who design those stems and headset tubes that have the hoses and cables going through them. It makes a 5-minute job last for hours. It's a hassle, it's complicated. Any benefits apart from aesthetics are highly questionable, even if we're talking about racing bicycles and aerodynamics and everything. So it's a complete nonsense that's become quite popular, and we still have a lot of frames where you see the cables and housing go at least through tubes. Let me show you the advantage and the beauty and simplicity of having external cables. Now, some frames have the cable, the housing go all the way, and in practice that does not prevent dirt and water from entering, it just prevents them from drying. So it's not good if you ride in winter conditions. I ride every year, whole winter, and I'm not very delighted with that. What I prefer is this. I will put this bicycle down to show you. Here is a good example of an externally routed cable. So this makes it very stiff, because this is a lot stiffer, the whole tube, compared to housing. That's why it's good to have housing stops and not full-length housing. And this is why it's great to have external cables. So I can just a second to loosen this a bit. Okay, now we can work. I can use a quick release on this brake now. Let's just see if I loosen this completely. This is happening because we are recording. And now I've created some slack, and I can easily pull this out and remove it and check if the cable beneath is okay, clean it, lubricate it, do whatever I want without changing cables and disassembling anything. And then I can relatively easily, when I'm not recording, of course, problems only happen when you are recording. I can relatively easily put it back together. Okay, here it is. So that's a few minutes with camera. Camera always adds 20 seconds to every operation that I do. Joking. Now, I can do the same for the rear derailleur. For that I will put it back so you can see. So, for shifting cables, all I need to do is to create some slack in the cable, and now I can easily pull this out and move it out of the way, inspect the cable, clean, lubricate if I need to, and then put it back into place. And okay, maybe not as easily. Okay, need to create some more slack, and here it is. So that's the beauty of the externally routed housing and cables. And of course it goes without saying that you can more quickly replace them when you eventually need to replace them, but you can prolong that period by just cleaning and lubricating it at your convenience, and you can easily inspect every part of your cable to see if it's frayed and creating any problems. The same goes for the simpler levers that you use for brakes instead of the STIs, because it's easier to remove the cable and it's not bending inside and less likely to break the shifter cable that often breaks. So that's another point. Now let's go to the gearing. One-by cranks. I have an article explaining the pros and cons of the one-by drive systems. Those are the systems where you have only one front chainring and you get all your gearing in the back. It's nice in terms of not having the front derailleur. You have front derailleur removed, the cable for the front derailleur, and the front shifter. So it clears up your dashboard if you want to have control for your dropper seat post, which again has its pros and cons. And that's about it. Maybe if you ride in very, very extremely muddy conditions, you might also get the benefit of mud not piling up on your front derailleur. but those conditions in my experience are extremely rare when you have that kinds of problems if everything is built and tuned properly. Everything else is a downside. So you need to use a very large, very expensive cassette to get any sort of acceptable gear range from the lowest to the highest gear, and you have larger gaps between adjacent gears, because even with many sprockets and with great difference between the largest and the smallest, you will inevitably get larger gaps between gears, which bothers some people more, some people less, but that's thing to consider. For most riding, it's in practice cheaper and simpler to have 3 front chainlinks to ride a triple, because it lets you have very low gearing, and that's something that most people complain about when we talk about gearing. How do I get my bicycle to have easier gearing for long steep climbs, especially those who ride longer rides or ride loaded? And the answer is simple: triple. It lets you use, if you have friction shifters and the triple cranks, you can put any cassette in the back that you find. The cheapest one you find, 7 or 8 speeds, 9, doesn't matter, it will all work, and that's what I choose. But again, the one-by systems have their simplicity, and some people just cannot figure out how to work gears. I have a video explaining how to shift gears, shifting patterns and everything. For some people it's impossible to master that, and there's no shame in that. I'm very bad at painting, for example, and singing, God forbid. So you work with what you have, what you prefer, what you like. So you can go with one-by, and index shifting, it has its pros, but it has its limitations, and it usually ends up being a lot more costly and fiddly and complicated to tune properly, even though you have one derailleur or shifter lever less. Many questions I get about problems with one-by systems. That's the reality. Now let's discuss short chainstays. What I mean by chainstays is the length between the axle of your rear wheel and the axle of your cranks. So the longer this is, the better your bicycle will perform when you're going downhill, especially on paved roads at high speeds. It will be more stable. It will also make your ride more comfortable, because you're not sitting on the top of the rear wheel, but in between the two wheels, so any bumping and tilting will be done at the sides while you are sitting in the middle and not experiencing all that. It will allow on steel frames for a bit more frame flex, but that's less relevant. And another important thing, when you are climbing, let's show this. So if you decide to climb a hill, your bicycle will be tilted upwards, and there is a point at which the center of gravity, where you sit and your belly button is the center of gravity, gets behind the axle of the rear wheel. When that happens, your front wheel will lose any traction. It will start lifting or have very low pressure on the ground, and that will not be very good in terms of controlling your bicycle steering or even continuing to climb. So if you manage to find low enough gearing and get up steep hills, and you have a lot of strength and stamina and everything, if you use many modern bicycles have very short chainstays, and you will face that limit, and it's not a very pleasant experience. So I think it's a good idea to look for longer chainstays. Again, this too is your choice. Marketing experts will say all stories like short chainstays make for more aggressive handling, better handling, quicker steering, whatnot. But in practice, at least I think that it's just a marketing fad. They're trying to make their frames smaller effectively, and so they can sell them as lighter, because that's a great marketing ploy to use in cycling industry. When they make something lighter, people will pay more money. So if you make longer chainstays, it's more material and weighs more, and you need to make it thick enough to not flex too much, and so it adds weight. And I think that's why they went with shorter. Another beauty of having longer wheelbase is that it lets you ride with thicker tires or with normal thickness tires and mudguards, which is good if you want to commute. and I will make a separate video, and I have already an article about commuting bicycle. I have articles for all kinds of bicycle buying. I put those in the video description. So for road bicycle, mountain bicycle, trekking, traveling, touring bicycles, city bicycle, commuting, and so on. So there are in even more detail discussed the pros and cons and things to pay attention to when you're buying a certain type of bicycle for a certain use. This is more of a general video. Many gears, I already touched upon that. So if you have many, I put bicycle back on the stand. Now, no need to put it on the ground. If you have many sprockets at the back, it ends up with more expensive chains, more expensive cassettes compared to fewer speeds, and the differences between the sprockets are so small that any kind of imperfection in your shifter, housing, cables, tuning if you use index shifting, or even the hanger of the rear derailleur, if you get any kind of bend, you will have problems shifting and will not be able to fix it until you replace or fix all those things. While the systems with fewer gears, 8 or fewer sprockets, are a lot more robust and less sensitive to any imperfections. For some reason, I would say that 8 speed is the breaking point. Past that, when you go to 9 speed, it gets a bit trickier, and you go to 10 and 11, 12, 13, as some, I think Rotor has 13 speed cassette. It gets out of hand very quickly with very questionable benefits. I will just discuss that briefly. I hear a lot of people saying that they need very small gaps between big gears, which is a bit of a contradiction when the same people talk about one-by drivetrains, because there you cannot have very small gaps between gears if you want low enough gearing. But regardless of that, some people talk they need just one tooth differences between each sprocket, and especially in the faster part of the cassette on the smaller sprockets. And that is true if you're riding at very high speeds, and it is true for the smallest two sprockets. I agree, but for most others it's not that crucial. For high speeds it's important because of the air drag, because it increases exponentially. But for other gears, human body is not like an inline 4 petrol engine. So we have a very wide range of revolutions per minute where we can effectively provide enough torque and power. We are not limited to just 10% of our peak torque and peak power, but we can go from a very low number of revolutions to relatively high 90 or 100 while still providing enough torque and power. So I think that's maybe a bit of a fad, but I respect if you value that and it's important to you, sure, by all means. But having many gears also has its downside, so take that into account and choose according to that. Another downside is that having very wide cassettes with many sprockets also makes the wheels effectively weaker. I have an article discussing that video. I have also a video discussing that on YouTube. I will also put it in the video's description. If I forget, please remind me. Now, rack mounts. It is very practical. If you have any kind of things to carry on your bicycle, to have the bicycle carry it. So if you have mounts for a rack, this one has also the front rack mounts that you can use. It makes things a lot easier, and compared to carrying a bag anywhere on yourself, it's even more aerodynamic to have a backpack strapped here than to have it on your back. They did some wind tunnel testing, but it also aligns with my experience, and that's how I often carry. Panniers, on the other hand, do create a lot of air drag, but they can be very practical because you don't put weight on yourself, you don't feel the pressure, the discomfort. If it's hot, you will sweat more and so on. So I think it's a good option to have, but many frames, even some that are built like city bicycles for commuting, don't have mounts for rear racks. So you need a place to fix the rack in the top section and at the bottom, and many don't have that. So that's another thing to pay attention to. If you never carry anything that doesn't fit your pockets, it's not important for you, but I suggest that you try carrying stuff on your bicycle before you completely decide, okay, this is not my cup of tea, because it's extremely practical. There are all sorts of frame bags, but having at least a rear rack is super practical, and it doesn't give you a high weight penalty, and it is quite sturdy even for riding off-road. Maybe for very spirited, very fast road cycling it's not a good idea, but for everything else I think it's great. And similar goes for mudguards. If you ride over wet pavement, it doesn't have to be raining, you will be dirty. So for any kind of transportation via bicycle, if you're not using it only to go for sports, it's practical to have some kind of mudguards. And another benefit of having mudguards is that they keep your drivetrain also lasting longer, and the front mudguard keeps your headset bearings last several times longer, because it prevents dirt from being sprayed and pushed into the bearing. That is what destroys the bearings, not the bumps from roads, which people often think it's a misconception, but quite not that, but the dirt intrusion is what kills, and usually the lower ones gets busted first because of that. But that's why I improvised. This is used for weekend rides and off-road riding, and I didn't want mudguards. Their downside is that you can have stuff stuck, tree branches or similar, so that may block your wheels. So they are a bit of a risk. So not for everything, mostly better for paved road riding. But anyway, here I improvised this short protection to just keep that, and the frame allows me enough room to put wide tires, relatively wide tires. These are 37 millimeters. They're okay, and this. And I will briefly just touch upon the lights. They are important for safety, and many bicycles don't have mounts where you can easily put the front and rear lights, so you have to rely on improvisation, those straps, and use some battery powered. Anything is better than nothing, and always carry lights even during the day, because you never know when you will be caught by the dark. The unplanned things are not something that you expect. You cannot plan for them, but you should prepare for them. And I think it's very irresponsible to not have good lights, because it's impossible to explain to yourself if you get hit by a vehicle or hit something because you don't have a front light. Why didn't I bother to put one? It's not super expensive, it's not super heavy. Make sure to figure out how to do that on your bicycle. This frame in particular has the hole here where I can mount this, and I'm using dynamo lights, dynamo hub. That's super practical, super convenient, but battery lights will also work. You just have some straps on your handlebars there and somewhere in the back, but also plan for that as well. And the reason why I'm stressing it is that on mountain bicycles or gravel bicycles that you ride off-road, you will have things splashing in the line of your frame especially. So if you put your rear light here at the back, if you ride through some mud, it will be caked in mud, and you might not even notice that it's not visible for any vehicles coming behind you. And similar goes for the front light. It might get some dirt splashed, and so, but those are usually mounted on the handlebars, so less critical. And I think I've now covered everything. If you have any questions or additions or corrections especially, please use the BikeGremlin.net forum, because it lets everyone search and find questions and answers. YouTube drowns any information, comments and replies in a sea of other comments and replies, and it does not allow you to search for a particular word, model or phrase in those comments, only videos. So I think that's completely, how do I say, wasted time, because in that case, if you have a question and I answer it, only you get the answer, while everyone else with the same question will have to answer it again, post it again and get the answer. So please use the BikeGremlin.net forum. And if you wish to support my work, I always forget to say that, like, share, subscribe, of course, that goes without saying. And you can support my work by joining the channel. There's a join button, and with a monthly subscription. And you can also go to patreon.com/BikeGremlin and also support me there with a monthly subscription, whichever works better for you. It helps. Right now we are still recording with a smartphone, simple smartphone and some Chinese microphone, and I would probably be able to make a bit higher quality and maybe even more videos with a normal camera that lets me see what's in the shot, so I wouldn't have to how do I say, improvise as much and spend as much time trying to get the videos to show what I want with the camera, with a bit wider angle, wider shot, and so on and so forth. That's my problem. But anyway, so you know what I will spend any money that I get. You will not get anything if you support my work on Patreon or by joining the YouTube membership. You will not get anything that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise for free. I don't have any special hidden videos or articles, and I don't plan to do that. If you wish to support me, it should only be because you think this is good and you want to see more of this, and to allow everyone to see more of this. That's it. No sponsors, don't plan any compromise in that area, and I think that's the whole video. Thank you very much if you sat through this whole video. I will see you in some other video. Cheers, stay cool. You thought it was over and it's not. I forgot to mention this. It's not a paid advert. This was actually suggested by some viewers in a previous video that I will also put in the video description. The manufacturer of this frame is New Albion, and the model is called Privateer or Privateer, or however it is pronounced. And this is what I think is a reasonably well built frame that lets you mount anything you want on it without any special exotic standards for both the headset cups or the bottom bracket. It has standard English bottom bracket. It has normal threadless fork with 1 1/8 inch diameter and press fit cups. Simple, cheap. I can still find those stuff anywhere, even in my country. And so I don't know who else makes frames like this. I've seen some with quill stems. Quill stems are not safe. I have an article discussing that. I will also put in the video's description. So about 129 articles now. But the threadless stems, but with a classic frame with down tube shifter mounts, it's just beautiful. You can adjust this with some stoppers to use shifters on your handlebars if you like. Let me show what those look like. This is what they look like. So you just thread them in instead of the down tube shifters, and they have a housing stop, so you can get the housing from your handlebars here and then continue it normally. So you can work with this whatever you wish to make, and all these parts are relatively easy to find still today. 27.2 millimeter diameter of seat post, so not super thick, not super thin, very common dimension that you can find still relatively easily. So I really like this frame, and I want to thank the good people for apparently still making and selling these. And if anyone knows any other manufacturers, especially in Europe, that make and sell this stuff at a remotely reasonable price, so I'm not talking about handmade boutique frames that cost thousands of dollars and that you have to wait for a decade to get when you order them. So this stuff, it's great, and that's it. Now it's really over. Cheers.